was born from audacity, a gamble that could have bankrupted Boeing. Pan Am's CEO walked into its headquarters with an impossible request: build me an aircraft that carries 400 people across the Atlantic, non-stop. No such aircraft existed. Boeing would have to develop new technologies at an unprecedented scale, build the world's largest factory just to assemble it, and stake the company's entire future on a hunch that people actually wanted to fly this way. Boeing said yes. Today, 1,574 of these aircraft have been built. They've carried an estimated 6 to 7 billion passengers. They've flown for airlines across 6 continents. This 4-engine giant didn't just meet Pan Am's impossible demand, it became the symbol of how we cross oceans. This is the story of a high-risk endeavor, from a bet-the-company gamble to an aircraft that reshaped global commerce. This is how Boeing built the jet that changed everything. Rewind to 1965, and air travel looks nothing like today. Flying was expensive, exclusive. A transatlantic ticket cost the equivalent of months of income for an average worker. Airports were small, aircraft were smaller. The Boeing 707 had revolutionized jet travel in the late 50s, but even that only carried about 140 passengers. Long-haul routes meant multiple stops for refueling. New York to Tokyo required landing in Alaska. London to Sydney took 3 days with overnight layovers. Airlines needed something bigger. Demand was growing faster than they could add flights. Airports were congested, but nobody had figured out how to build bigger aircraft without making them impossibly heavy, dangerously inefficient, or both. Then, Juan Trippe entered the picture. Trippe ran Pan Am, and he had a vision that sounded insane: democratize air travel, make it accessible to regular families, the middle class, make flying cheap enough that a teacher from Ohio could afford to see Paris. But that required an aircraft that didn't exist, something that could carry twice as many passengers as a 707 while actually making money doing it. Trippe approached Boeing with his pitch. Its response would define the next 50 years of aviation. But first, it needed to solve problems that had never been solved before. Boeing's first solution came from an unexpected place: a failed military contract. In 1964, Boeing had competed for a military contract that would end up being the Lockheed C-5 Galaxy program, the US Air Force's massive military transport. Their design featured a double-deck fuselage and high-mounted wings. It had lost to Lockheed. Most companies would have shelved the work, moved on. Boeing saw an opportunity. When Juan Trippe came calling with his impossible request, Boeing already had engineers who understood large aircraft design. They had wind tunnel data. They had structural concepts. The C-5 loss became the 747's foundation. But Trippe didn't want a military transport. He wanted a passenger aircraft, and he had specific demands: around 400 passengers, enough range to cross the Atlantic without stopping. But Boeing was also developing its supersonic aircraft, the 2707, competing with Concorde and the 2144. The genius of that design? Loading cargo through the nose. The problem? You can't load cargo through the nose if the cockpit is in the way. So, Boeing moved the cockpit upstairs. This created the 747's iconic hump. Initially, it only extended back one section, just enough for the cockpit and a small first-class lounge. That hump became the 747's signature. You can recognize this aircraft from any angle, anywhere in the world. What started as a practical solution to a cargo loading problem became the most distinctive silhouette in aviation history. The 747 wasn't supposed to be revolutionary, it was supposed to be practical. But something happened along the way. In 1966, Boeing committed to the 747 program. The company took on massive debt to finance development. We're talking bet-the-company levels of risk here. It started by building the world's largest building. Everett, Washington. The main assembly bay covers 98.3 acres under one roof with 472 million cubic feet of volume. You could fit Disneyland inside it. Here's the insane part. It was building this factory before the aircraft design was even finalized. Workers were constructing the assembly line while engineers were still drawing the plane. The doors are so massive that opening them changes the air pressure inside. This wasn't normal industrial planning. Boeing had promised Pan Am delivery by 1969. Joe Sutter led the engineering team. His group got nicknamed the Incredibles because of what they were attempting. These engineers worked around the clock, literally 24-hour shifts, sleeping at their desks. The pressure was crushing. The Everett factory represented Boeing's all-in moment. Tens of millions of dollars was spent on infrastructure for an aircraft that existed only on paper. If the 747 failed, that factory would become the most expensive monument to hubris in industrial history. It didn't fail. The Everett factory would go on to produce not just the 747, but the 767, 777, and 787. It will also house a 737 MAX assembly line. It remains the largest building by volume in the world, all because Boeing bet everything on an aircraft that didn't exist yet. Strip away the marketing, the liveries, the airline brands, and what you're left with is this: an aircraft that represented one of the most comprehensive engineering challenges in commercial aviation history. The 747 wasn't revolutionary because of one breakthrough, it was revolutionary because of everything, all at once. Let's start with the fuselage. How do you make a tube wide enough for around 400 people to actually fly? The fuselage needed to be 20 feet across. That's unprecedented. Double aisle configuration, 3 seats on each side, with twin aisles running between them. Making a cylinder that large aerodynamically efficient meant rethinking everything about aircraft structure. Boeing used advanced aluminium alloys, thicker skin panels, strategically placed to handle stress. Every rivet matters because this thing weighs 750,000 pounds at takeoff. The wings are an impressive engineering achievement. Swept back at 37.5 degrees with complex high-lift devices, leading-edge slats, and triple-slotted trailing-edge flaps, these features let the 747 take off and land at reasonable speeds despite its weight. Classic variants have a wingspan of 195 feet and 8 inches. The 747-400 stretches to 211 feet, 5 inches with wing extensions. The 747-8 reaches 224 feet, 7 inches. But the real brilliance is in the structure. The wing box, the main structural component, is a massive built-up assembly of skins, spars, and ribs spanning the entire fuselage width. Nobody had attempted this scale before. Fuel storage became another nightmare. The wings hold multiple interconnected tanks with complex plumbing. Fuel has to be transferred between tanks during flight to maintain a proper center of gravity. Then there were the engines. Nothing existed that could power this beast. The 747 needed 4 engines, each producing over 40,000 pounds of thrust. Pratt & Whitney developed the JT9D specifically for this program. It was a high-bypass turbofan engine, quieter and more powerful than anything that came before. The landing gear required distributing 735,000 pounds across 18 wheels. 4 main landing gear bogies with 4 wheels each, plus a nose gear with 2 wheels. The body gear features steering capability to reduce the turning radius. This lets the 747 make tight turns on taxiways designed for smaller aircraft. Every system on the 747 was rethought: 4 independent hydraulic systems, 3 electrical systems, pneumatic systems for pressurization and air conditioning. All of this had to work flawlessly at 38,000 feet while traveling at 570 miles per hour. The 747 wasn't just built bigger, it was built smarter. February 9th, 1969, Everett, Washington. Test pilot Jack Waddell pushed the throttles forward on the first 747 prototype. The aircraft lumbered down the runway. 80 knots, 100, 120. The nose lifted, and then, impossibly, this massive structure broke free from the ground. the 747 was flying, but proving it was safe to carry passengers, that was a different battle entirely. Boeing launched one of the most grueling test programs in aviation history. It tested the wings to destruction. Engineers applied increasing loads until the wings bent upwards at extreme angles. The wings finally failed at 150% of the design limit load, exactly as planned. That safety margin got baked into every flight. One test nearly ended in disaster. During a high-speed taxi test, the nose gear started vibrating violently, a phenomenon called shimmy. Engineers had to redesign the entire nose gear steering mechanism to eliminate the oscillations. Then came the flutter tests. Flutter is an aerodynamic instability that can literally tear an aircraft apart. At high speeds, wings can oscillate violently if the structure isn't properly damped. The 747's massive wings were a concern. Engineers installed accelerometers across the airframe and flew through the entire speed envelope, monitoring for dangerous vibration. The aircraft passed, barely. Early test flights revealed issues with the tail structure, minor oscillations that required design modifications. Boeing reinforced the vertical stabilizer and adjusted how the horizontal stabilizer attaches. Despite setbacks, Boeing mostly stayed on schedule. In December 1969, the FAA granted the 747 its type certificate, 15 months from first flight to certification. At the time, unheard of for something this complex. But the real gamble was just beginning. January 22nd, 1970, Pan Am Flight 747 departed New York's JFK, bound for London Heathrow. The first commercial 747 flight. The jet age just went jumbo. It was a media spectacle. Journalists packed the upper deck. Champagne flowed. Juan Trippe himself was aboard celebrating his vision. First Lady, Pat Nixon, had christened the aircraft weeks earlier with the traditional champagne bottle ceremony. Pan Am was the launch customer, but it was not alone. TWA, Lufthansa, Japan Airlines, and BOAC all followed with orders. Then reality hit hard. The early JT9D engines were temperamental. Reliability issues plagued the first months. Airlines experienced frequent delays. Engine changes became routine. Pratt & Whitney scrambled to fix the issues. The engines simply weren't ready for commercial service. Ground crews weren't prepared either. The 747 required specialized equipment. Existing jet bridges were too short. Fuel tracks needed upgrading because the 747's tanks held 3 times what a 707 carried. Baggage handling systems couldn't process the volume. Airports scrambled to adapt infrastructure. But here's the bigger concern: economics. Airlines ordered the 747, expecting passenger demand to explode. It didn't. The early 70s brought an economic downturn. Fuel prices spiked. Airlines couldn't fill the seats. Load factors plummeted. Flights operated at massive losses. Pan Am, the 747's biggest champion, started hemorrhaging money. Other carriers scaled back orders. Boeing's stock plummeted. The company teetered on bankruptcy. But Boeing's cargo vision saved everything. That nose cargo door wasn't just a backup plan, it became a lifeline. Airlines discovered they could use combi configurations, passengers in front, cargo in back, or operate dedicated freight flights. The 747's cargo capability, it meant the aircraft could earn revenue even when passenger demand was soft. By 1972, the 747 started proving itself. Engine reliability improved, passenger demand recovered. Airlines learned to fill those 400 seats by lowering prices, expanding routes, and making air travel accessible to broader demographics. The 747 democratized flying. Coach tickets across the Atlantic dropped to prices middle-class families could afford. Tourism exploded. International business connections multiplied. By the mid-70s, the 747 wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. One aircraft is a product, a family of aircraft is a strategy. Boeing didn't stop with the original 747-100, they iterated, improved, and expanded. The The 747-200 debuted in 1971. More powerful engines, increased fuel capacity. This variant flew further and carried more. Airlines loved it. It became the backbone of long-haul fleets throughout the 70s and 80s. The 747-200 came in multiple configurations: passenger, freighter, and combi, a hybrid with passengers in the front and freight in the back. Versatility became the 747's calling card. The 747 SP appeared in 1976, a shortened version designed for ultra-long-range routes with fewer passengers. The fuselage was 48 feet shorter, reducing weight and drag. It could fly non-stop from New York to Tokyo, unheard of at the time. Airlines like Pan Am and South African Airways used the SP to open new routes that bypassed traditional stopover hubs, but it never sold in huge numbers. Only 45 were built, a niche product for a niche market. The 747-300 arrived in 1983. The upper deck got extended, creating more passenger space. That iconic hump now stretched back far enough to accommodate additional seating or premium cabins. The 747-300 could carry up to 550 passengers in high-density configurations. Swiss Air was the launch customer. The extended upper deck became standard on all subsequent variants. Introduced in 1989, the 747-400 was a technological leap. Glass cockpits, digital avionics, two-crew operation. No more flight engineer needed. Winglets at the tips reduced drag and increased efficiency. More powerful engines, longer range. The 747-400 could fly over 7,200 nautical miles non-stop. London to Sydney became possible with just one refueling stop. Airlines replaced their aging 747-200 fleets with 747-400s throughout the 90s. This variant became the best-selling 747 model, 694 delivered. It dominated long-haul aviation for 2 decades. This is the 747 most people remember, the one that connected the world during the peak of globalization. The 747-8 was Boeing's final attempt to keep the Queen relevant. Launched in 2005, the freighter variant entered service in 2011, with passenger service following in 2012. New General Electric GE NX engines, quieter, more efficient, more powerful, a stretched fuselage, advanced materials, improved aerodynamics. It became the longest commercial aircraft in service, but airlines weren't interested. 2-engine widebodies like the 777 and A350 offered similar capacity with better fuel efficiency. Only 155 were built, most were freighters. The passenger version, the 747-8 Intercontinental, found few buyers. Lufthansa, Korean Air, and Air China were the primary operators. The 747-8 was technologically impressive, but commercially too late. The market had moved on. The 747 didn't operate in a vacuum. Competitors tried to dethrone the Queen. Some came close, none succeeded. The Trijets. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10 and Lockheed L-1011 TriStar appeared in the early 70s. Both were widebodies, both carried 300-plus passengers, but they were Trijets, 3 engines instead of 4, slightly smaller, slightly less capable. Airlines chose them for routes with less demand, but for long-haul high-capacity routes, the 747 remained the queen. The DC-10 and L-1011 fought each other to near extinction. Lockheed exited the commercial aviation market entirely after the TriStar program. McDonnell Douglas barely survived. The Airbus Challenge. Airbus entered with the A300 and later the A310, offering twin-engine efficiency. But Airbus focused on the mid-capacity market initially, avoiding direct competition with the 747. Smart strategy. It allowed Airbus to establish itself before challenging Boeing's dominance. Then came the Airbus A340. 4 engines, long range, designed specifically to compete with the 747-400 on ultra-long-haul routes. it failed. The A340 was less efficient, carried fewer passengers, and couldn't match the 747's cargo capacity. Airlines preferred the twin-engine 777, which offered a similar range with lower operating costs. Airbus discontinued the A340 after years of disappointing sales. The Airbus A380 became the direct assault on the 747's throne. Entering service in 2007, the A380 was larger, 555 passengers in standard configuration, up to 853 in all economy, double-decker throughout the entire fuselage, 4 engines, the biggest passenger aircraft ever built. Some airlines, like Emirates, embraced it. The A380 offered unmatched passenger comfort and capacity, but it became a commercial disaster. Development costs spiraled, production was inefficient. Airlines realized they didn't need 550-seat aircraft, they needed flexibility. Twin-engine widebodies like the 777 and A350 could serve more routes, more frequently, with lower costs. Airbus stopped A380 production in 2021 after building only 251 aircraft. The 747 outlasted its would-be successor. Here's the irony: the Boeing 777 became the 747's real replacement. Introduced in 1995, the 777 offered twin-engine efficiency, long range, and 300-plus passenger capacity. The economics were undeniable. The 777 didn't directly compete with the 747, it replaced the need for it. By the 2000s, 4-engine aircraft were becoming obsolete. Fuel efficiency mattered more than capacity. ETOPS regulations allowed twin-engine aircraft to fly routes previously restricted to 3- or 4-engine planes. The market shifted. The 747's era was ending, but its impact was just being fully understood. The 747 didn't just fly routes, it created them. Before the 747, long-haul routes required stopovers. New York to Tokyo meant refueling in Alaska. London to Sydney required multiple stops. Airlines operated hub-and-spoke networks because aircraft couldn't fly far enough with enough passengers. Tickets were expensive, mandating feeder flights to have enough passengers on longer journeys from hubs. The 747 changed the math. Suddenly, airlines could fly direct across oceans. Passenger capacity and fuel efficiency aligned. Routes that were economically impossible became viable. Pan Am built its empire on the 747. Transatlantic and trans-Pacific routes multiplied. Pan Am positioned itself as the global airline, connecting continents with daily 747 service. Its strategy was bold: fly the 747 to secondary cities that previously couldn't support wide-body service. Portland, Seattle, and San Diego suddenly had direct 747 service to Tokyo and Hong Kong. But Pan Am's aggressive expansion proved fatal. The airline overextended. Competitors like United and Delta undercut prices. Pan Am's financial position deteriorated throughout the 80s. By 1991, Pan Am collapsed. Ironically, the airline that launched the 747 got destroyed partly by the capacity wars the aircraft enabled. British Airways used the 747 to dominate Heathrow. At its peak, BA operated over 50 747s, the largest fleet in Europe. London became the global aviation hub, partly because BA could fill that many jumbo jets daily. Japan Airlines and All Nippon Airways operated massive 747 fleets for domestic high-density routes. Tokyo to Osaka, Tokyo to Sapporo, short flights with 500-plus passengers crammed into a single aircraft. Only in Japan did this make sense. High population density, business travelers who wouldn't drive or take trains. Airlines needed maximum capacity on short routes. The 747 was perfect. JAL operated over 80 747s at its peak, one of the largest fleets in the world. Flights departed Tokyo every hour. The 747 printed money on Japanese domestic routes. Middle Eastern carriers like Saudi Arabian Airlines use 747s to connect the Gulf to Europe, Asia, and North America. Qantas pioneered ultra-long-haul with the 747. The Kangaroo route from Sydney to London became iconic. Early flights still required stops in Bahrain, Singapore, or Bangkok. But as 747 variants improved, non-stop segments became possible. The 747-400 finally did Sydney to Los Angeles non-stop, a 13-hour marathon that redefined long-haul flying. Qantas crews developed expertise in ultra-long-haul operations. Crew rest became critical. Pilot fatigue management protocols got pioneered on Qantas 747 flights. The common thread across all regions, the 747 didn't just serve markets, it created them. Step aboard. You enter through a door on the left side. The cabin stretches forward and back, seemingly endless. Twin aisles, rows of seats in a 3-4-3 configuration in economy, overhead bins, the hum of air conditioning, the faint smell of aviation fuel, and recycled air. But the 747 isn't just another cabin, it's an experience. That staircase to the upper deck, climbing those stairs feels exclusive. The upper deck is where first-class passengers sit, where business travelers work, and where the wealthy sip champagne at 38,000 feet. Early 747s even featured a lounge in the upper deck. Bars, swivel chairs, social spaces where passengers could mingle mid-flight. Pan Am advertised this as the most luxurious flying experience ever created. As airlines maximized revenue, lounges disappeared, more seats replaced social spaces, but the upper deck retained its mystique. Pilots love the 747 cockpit. Positioned high above the fuselage, the view is unparalleled. The curvature of the Earth at cruising altitude, sunrises from the cockpit became legendary among pilots. Early 747s required 3 crew: captain, first officer, and flight engineer. The flight engineer sat sideways behind the pilots, managing systems. Hundreds of switches, gauges, and dials covered the engineer's panel. The 747-400 eliminated the flight engineer. Glass cockpit displays replaced analog instruments. 2 pilots could manage everything. That engine roar, especially on older variants with JT90 engines, deep, powerful. You feel it in your chest during takeoff. The entire aircraft vibrates as the pilots push the throttles forward. But once airborne, the 747 is surprisingly smooth. The massive wings absorb turbulence, the size damps motion. Passengers often comment on how stable the ride feels compared to smaller aircraft. Landing a 747 is a spectacle. The nose tilts down. The aircraft seems impossibly large as it approaches the runway. The main gear touches first, 18 wheels absorbing 600,000 plus pounds. Then, the nose gear gently settles. Reverse thrust roars. The engines scream as thrust reversers deflect exhaust forward, slowing the aircraft. Brakes glow red. The deceleration is firm, but controlled. For those who know, flying the 747 means something. It's history, it's legacy, it's the Queen. Passenger flights get the glamour, freight pays the bills. To this day, the 747 dominates cargo aviation like no other aircraft. That nose cargo door isn't an afterthought, it's genius. Open the nose, swing it up, and you can drive forklift straight into the fuselage. Pallets load end to end, no wasted space. The main deck of a 747 freighter holds over 30 pallets. That's a lot of cargo. Electronics, pharmaceuticals, automotive parts, fresh flowers from Kenya, seafood from Norway, anything that needs to cross an ocean fast. UPS operates one of the largest 747-8F fleets among cargo carriers. It needs speed. Overnight delivery from Asia to North America requires aircraft that can carry massive loads non-stop. The 747 was built for exactly this. Cargolux, the Luxembourg-based freight specialist, has a large 747 freighter fleet. It moves goods across continents daily, Europe to Asia, Asia to North America. The 747 enables global just-in-time supply chains. Cathay Pacific Cargo, Korean Air Cargo, Nippon Cargo Airlines. Asian carriers dominate 747 freight operations. Hong Kong, Seoul, and Tokyo became cargo megahubs. the 747 made it possible. Converted passenger 747s had flooded the freight market. Airlines retire passenger 747s, but convert them to freighters. Some companies even specialize in the conversion process. Strip out seats, reinforce the floor, and install cargo doors. A passenger 747 becomes a freighter in months. As of now, hundreds of 747 freighters remain in service. They're older, less efficient, but they still move a staggering percentage of global air freight. Apple's iPhone supply chain, powered by 747 freighters. Components from Asia to assembly plants to global distribution centers. The 747 is the invisible backbone. The 747 didn't just move people and cargo, it reshaped industries. Tourism exploded because of the 747. Before it, international tourism was limited. Expensive flights, limited capacity, only the wealthy flew abroad regularly. The 747 made tourism a mass-market industry. Cheaper tickets, more routes, middle-class families could suddenly afford European vacations. Asian tourism boomed. The Mediterranean became accessible. Caribbean islands thrived. Entire economies got built on 747-enabled tourism. Thailand, Greece, Spain, their tourism industries exploded in the 80s and 90s, directly tied to increased air capacity. Global supply chains depend on the 747. Modern manufacturing relies on just-in-time logistics. Components made in Taiwan, assembled in Mexico, shipped to customers in Germany, all within days. The 747 freighter made this possible. High-value goods moved by air instead of ship. Speed became a competitive advantage. Electronics, pharmaceuticals, automotive parts, fashion all depend on 747 cargo networks. Governments use the 747s for strategic purposes. Air Force One, the US President's aircraft, is a modified 747-200. Two are in service, designated VC-25A. They're flying command centers, capable of refueling mid-air and operating as mobile White House units. They're equipped with secure communications, defensive countermeasures, and self-sufficiency systems, allowing the president to govern from 38,000 feet during crises. Japan operated 747s as government transports until 2019, when they were replaced by 777-300ERs. South Korea's presidential 747, designated Code 1, was introduced around 2010. The aircraft includes conference rooms, secure communications, and luxury accommodations. The E-4B, nicknamed Night Watch, is a 747 modified as an airborne command post for nuclear war. It can survive electromagnetic pulses and operate independently for days. 4 E-4Bs were built in the 70s. They're constantly on alert. Even NASA used the 747, the shuttle carrier aircraft, a modified 747 that transported the Space Shuttle orbiter piggyback. Iconic images of the shuttle riding atop a 747 became symbols of American aerospace achievement, even a Lego set. Boeing itself was saved by the 747. The company nearly collapsed during development, but the 747's success established Boeing as the dominant player in wide-body aviation for decades. The Everett factory, built for the 747, remains the largest building by volume in the world. It's where Boeing assembles the 777, 787, and now the 777X. Soon the 737 MAX, all because of the 747. Hundreds of thousands of jobs, entire supply chains, aerospace engineering expertise. The 747 created an industrial ecosystem that still drives the American economy. Let's take a breath here and talk about the remarkable things this aircraft has achieved. The most passengers ever. The 747 holds the Guinness World Record for the most passengers ever carried on a single flight. During Operation Solomon in 1991, an El Al 747 evacuated 1,088 Ethiopian Jews from Addis Ababa to Tel Aviv, including 2 babies born during the flight. The 747 can fly on 3 engines, even 2 in an emergency. During a 1985 incident, China Airlines Flight 006, a 747 SP, suffered engine failure and violent turbulence over the Pacific. The aircraft entered a dive. The captain recovered control and landed safely. All engines were damaged, but the airframe survived. The 747's wings are so large that if you parked them tip to tip, they'd cover nearly an acre. Wing area is 5,500 square feet. Fuel capacity is absurd. The original 747-100 carried around 48,000 gallons. The 747-400 holds over 57,000 gallons. And the 747-8, that can carry up to 64,000 gallons. The main cabin is so large you could park several buses inside. Length is 184 feet, width is 20 feet, height is 8 feet. 747s have transported everything: horses, elephants, yachts, satellites, even parts of the International Space Station. Once, a 747 carried an entire train locomotive from Australia to China. The 747 is one of the few commercial aircraft to have a military variant. The YAL-1 was an experimental airborne laser weapon system. Boeing modified a 747-400 with a nose-mounted laser designed to shoot down ballistic missiles. The program was eventually cancelled, but the ambition was incredible. With 1,574 aircraft built and 4 engines each, over 6,000 engines were installed on 747s throughout production, not counting spares and replacements. Pratt & Whitney, General Electric, Rolls-Royce, all competing to power the Queen. The 747's retirement rate accelerated dramatically after COVID-19. Airlines parked entire fleets. Many never flew again. Aviation graveyards in California and Arizona are now filled with retired 747s, but some refuse to die. Cargo operators still fly them daily. The last Boeing 747 rolled off the production line on December 6, 2022, with final delivery in January 2023. Tail number N863GT, a 747-8F destined for Atlas Air. Workers gathered. A ceremony marked the occasion. Flags, speeches, nostalgia. 54 years of production, 1,574 aircraft built. An era closed. But why did it end? Economics, fuel efficiency, technology. Modern twin-engine aircraft like the Boeing 777X and Airbus A350-1000 offer similar range and capacity with better fuel efficiency. Airlines can't justify operating 4 engines when 2 engines do the job cheaper. ETOPS regulations evolved. Initially, twin-engine aircraft couldn't fly more than 60 minutes from the nearest airport over water. Safety concerns about losing an engine mid-ocean. But engine reliability improved. ETOPS 180 allowed 3-hour diversions, then ETOPS 330, now ETOPS 370. Twin-engine aircraft can fly virtually any commercial route on Earth. The need for 4-engine aircraft evaporated. Passenger 747s disappeared fastest. British Airways retired its last 747 in 2020. Qantas in 2020, United Airlines in 2017, Delta in 2018, Japan Airlines in 2011. Only a handful of airlines still operate passenger 747-8s, Lufthansa, Korean Air, and Air China among them. Lufthansa for flagship routes, Korean Air for long-haul and domestic high-density flights. But orders for 777 aircraft, the closest twin-engine replacement of the 747, signal the end is near. The 747's days as a passenger carrier are numbered. Freighters are different. Cargo operators still value the 747's capacity and nose-loading capability. Atlas Air, UPS, Cargolux, and Kalita Air will keep flying 747 freighters for decades. Converted and already built freighters will keep some 747s flying into the 2030s, perhaps 2040s. Older passenger 747s are still being converted. Market demand remains, for now. The Museum of Flight in Seattle has a prototype 747. National Air and Space Museum has one, well, a nose section. Several 747s could become aviation hotels or restaurants. Entrepreneurs buy retired aircraft, park them on land, and convert them to quirky accommodations or dining experiences. Most 747s, though, they'll end up in graveyards, dismantled for parts, aluminium recycled, engines sold to other operators. The reality of aviation retirement. Will we see another 747? No. Boeing has no plans for a successor. The market doesn't exist. Twin-engine widebodies dominate. The A380 failed. The 747 is the last of its kind, but that doesn't diminish what it accomplished. Every aircraft eventually faces decline. Even the most successful programs eventually age out as newer technology emerges, but the 747 is different. It didn't fade away, it defined an era. Look at what the 747 replaced and what replaced the 747. The 707 and DC-8 were the first jet-age aircraft. The 747 outlasted them. Suddenly, narrow-body jets couldn't compete with the 747. The four-engine era ended decisively. The A340 and 747-400 passenger variants are gone from airline service, except for a handful of operators in niche markets. The A380 or 747-8i never gained traction. The 777 and later the 787 and A350 represented the death of four engines on passenger routes. ETOPS certification advanced to the point where twins can fly anywhere, and the economics overwhelmingly favor two engines over four. The legacy isn't just about efficiency, it's about what the 747 proved possible. It proved that massive aircraft could be commercially viable. It proved that air travel could be democratized. It proved that global supply chains could depend on air freight. Most importantly, it proved that audacity pays off. Boeing nearly went bankrupt building the 747, but that gamble paid off. For 50 years, the 747 generated revenue, prestige, and technological leadership. It justified the risk 1,000 times over. Cultural icon. The 747 transcended aviation. It became a cultural symbol. Movies feature 747s, Air Force One in 1997, Die Hard 2 in 1990, Executive Decision in 1996. The 747 represents power, prestige, and global reach. Brands use the 747 in advertising. Its silhouette is instantly recognizable. Even non-aviation enthusiasts know the 747. Airline spotters gather at airports to photograph 747s. Certain liveries became legendary. British Airways Landor livery, Pan Am's Blue Globe, Qantas's Flying Kangaroo, all on 747s. The 747 isn't just an aircraft, it's a phenomenon. The queen of the skies. Long may she reign in memory. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?